This day in sports history.
Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
Hey, and welcome back to This Day in Sports History. This is Steve White, your host for the podcast. It's September 12th, and on this day in 1995, the Harlem Globetrotters lost? The Harlem Globetrotters have a long history that stretches back to the 1920s. In the early years, the Trotters were a barnstorming basketball team driving around the Northeast, the Midwest, wherever they could find a game and a paying crowd. The show you might see now during a Globetrotters performance grew out of the showmanship that they displayed a few years into their history. But the Trotters were legit professional basketball players, and as they continued to grow in popularity, they found ways to entertain the crowd, and then the Washington Generals were put together as the straight man to the comedic Globetrotters. Now, the Generals started in 1952, and the Trotters proceeded to beat them just about every time out on the court. Now, in January 1971 in Martin, Tennessee, the Generals actually beat the Trotters on a last-second shot, causing little children and some grown-ups in the crowd to cry. And that loss broke a streak of 2,495 wins. But the team that beat the Harlem Globetrotters on this night was not the Washington Generals. The Trotters went on another run of winning games, and in 1995 they were playing an 11-game series in Vienna, Austria, against a team of former NBA and former college players, led by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem was 48 at this point, and he'd been out of the NBA for a couple of years. On the team with him were former Boston Celtics stars Cedric Cornbread Maxwell, Nate Archibald, JoJo White, along with former San Antonio Spur Artis Gilmore. Kareem had actually been recruited to play with the Globetrotters out of UCLA. He was offered a $1 million contract back in 1969, but he refused, instead to go play with the Milwaukee Bucks. And this was the third game of that 11-game series between the two. And if you have seen the Globetrotters play, then you know most of the game is scripted, but the games in this series were actually not scripted. Kareem looked like a young NBA player rather than a grandpa, scoring 34 points. When the final horn sounded, the scoreboard read, Kareem's All-Stars 91, Globetrotters 85, ending a streak of 8,829 wins for the Trotters. The next night out, the Trotters got back to their winning ways. On this day in 2009, Serena Williams lost it with a line judge, and not only did it cost her the match, but it also cost her a record amount of money. It was the U.S. Open women's semifinal match between world number 2 Serena Williams and former world number 1 Kim Clijsters. Clijsters had taken a couple of years off to become a mother and was working her way back into the circuit. She was an unseeded wild card in this tournament. Serena and Clijsters had some history, playing some heated matches going back a decade, and Clijsters had just bounced Venus to advance to the semis in this tournament, so that added a little bit to the drama in this match, but there was a whole lot more drama to come. The Belgian won the first set 6-4, and then pushed Serena in the second. Serena was serving, trailing 6-5 in the set and down 15-30 in the game. After a fault on her first serve, Serena truly had her back against the wall. On her second service, the line judge, Shino Tsurubuchi, called a foot fault. 15-40 Clijsters. Serena's emotions bubbled just under the surface, but her attempt to keep them there failed. After getting a ball for her next service, Serena turned toward Tsurubuchi, pointed, and then walked towards her, yelling at her. After a few seconds, Serena turned back around and walked back to the service line to prepare for the service. Before that could happen, though, Surabuchi got up and walked to the chair umpire to tell her what Williams had said. Now, Williams had already been warned in this match about racket abuse. Another warning would cost her a point, which she did not have to give. A few moments later, 2 more officials were summoned to the court and told about the exchange. A warning was issued, a point penalty assessed, which cost her the game, the set, and the match. After the match, an attempt to lip-read what Serena had said to Surabuchi came up with Serena saying something to the effect of shoving the tennis ball down the lineswoman's throat. Initially, Serena was fined $10,000, but after a 2-month investigation, the fine was increased to $82,000, the largest ever handed out in tennis. That fine would stand as the largest until 2019, when Nick Kyrgios eclipsed it. I'll talk about that in a couple of days. Serena did eventually apologize to Shino Surabuchi, saying she acted inappropriately and would like to give her a hug. On this day in 1976, it was the surprise return to the racetrack for Niki Lauda. If you remember back to the August 1st edition of this dish, Lauda was nearly killed in a fiery crash at the Nürburgring in Germany. He was actually given last rites by a priest at the hospital. He had suffered horrific burns in the 55 seconds that it took to extract him from the car. He lost his eyelids, most of his right ear, and his scalp was burned horribly. Now, this is just 33 days after that wreck, and he missed only 2 races. Interestingly enough, Lauda still led the championship points race. It had been cut to just 2 points by James Hunt, but still, Lauda's name was on top. The series was racing at Monza for the Italian Grand Prix. Lauda pushed his car in qualifying and started the race 5th on the grid. Hunt was penalized for what officials called fuel irregularities, and he had to start in the back. Lauda stayed out of trouble throughout the day and amazingly not only finished the race, but placed 4th. Hunt spun out on lap 12 and never returned, allowing Lauda to extend his points lead heading into the final 3 races of the season. At the start of 1951, boxer Sugar Ray Robinson was on top of the world. In February, Robinson TKO'd Jake LaMotta. He was loved in the States, and then when he went on a European tour, he was loved there as well. His good year did have a hiccup in July, though, when he lost his middleweight title to Brit Randy Turpin. Just 2 months after that, on this day, a rematch between Robinson and Turpin was held at the Polo Grounds in New York. 61,000 piled in to watch the fighter that many have called the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Robinson went to work on Turpin early with quick jabs and combinations, and by every account, he was way ahead on everybody's scorecard in the 10th round when he caught Turpin wide open with a right uppercut, turning his head and sending him to the canvas. Turpin barely made it back to his feet at the count of 9 when Robinson laid into him again. The barrage left Turpin unprotected, and the referee stepped in and stopped the fight, giving the middleweight belt back to Sugar Ray. It was a pretty sweet deal for Robinson, too. At the time, this was the largest crowd to watch a middleweight fight, and Robinson's 30% take of the gate receipts put a lot of money in the champ's bank account. And on this day in 1928, future Baseball Hall of Famer Ty Cobb announced his retirement. After playing the first 22 years of his career with the Detroit Tigers, Cobb spent the last 2 seasons with the Philadelphia Athletics. By his standards, Cobb was not hitting the ball very well. He was hitting .323 with an on-base percentage of .389, but he was mostly relegated to pinch hitting duties at this point for Connie Mack's team. He had picked up his final hit of his career back on September 3rd with a pinch hit double. That gave him 4,189 career hits, a record that would stand for 57 years. On the 11th, Mack once again inserted Cobb as a pinch hitter, but he popped out. When he retired on this day, he retired with the greatest career batting average at .366, a mark that stood until this year when Negro League statistics were added in. Josh Gibson's .372 average now tops the list. Cobb's career average is second. And it's time now for today's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. All right, well, this one kinda, sorta has to do with sports, but in an indirect way. There are 9 diagonal lines in each end zone at Notre Dame's football stadium, so a total of 18. They are angled at precisely 42 degrees, symbolizing the university's founding in 1842. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Dish is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.